we can all see Chuck Carucci run across the field with the ball. Everybody in North Reading's looking forward to that.
And won't that be the 50th Levy 50-year anniversary or something?
I think it is.
I thought that's what they said.
Yeah.
50th anniversary.
He's got the ball from 1957, 8. So he's gonna bring that out to the coin flip or something.
That's great. Sounds really good.
So have you finished your plans for where the team will practice or where home
Currently,
games?
right now, yeah, I actually had a meeting today with Marty Tilton over at Ipswich River Park, and it looks like field hockey and one level of soccer will be able to play at Ipswich River Park. We have McGuire Field for when we host the two freshman games, boys and girls. Usually they travel and host together. Kerry Park is still available for whatever, home varsity game we have, whether it's boy or girl. And the football team will be practicing up at the middle school for the year. And everyone else stays pretty much the same. Cross country will be running at Earl Parker, and everything else stays pretty much the same. So, Marty Tilton with the rec department has been fantastic. They
I was
really,
gonna add that,
they
they've
did
been really
great
cooperative
job.
in finding us facilities to host the kids during the
Yeah.
fall. It's been great. Marty, was that
At the meeting, yeah, it was at the last meeting, yeah.
It'll be well worth the inconvenience.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's a beautiful venue. It's nice having soccer and field hockey next to each other, playing some games. I think that'll show some interest in both sports.
Great. Okay,
Thanks, Dave.
we're gonna jump into, we're gonna jump into the athletic, user fee issue. Okay, as everyone knows, we, have to reduce the budget, and we specifically targeted, shifting some $50,000 from the school's operating budget to the athletic revolving account. And it is the, hopes of the committee that a combination of an increase in user fees and some economies in the athletic budget could be arrived at. So,
The other thing is, we're also going to take a little more money out of the out of the balance of the revolving fund to
Correct.
make up the $50,000 difference.
so do you want to speak to your recommendations on how we increase fees?
Well, we talked a little bit about this in the athletic subcommittee, and I think we talked about $400 for the first sport will stay the same, adding $100 to the second sport, which would make it a $200 fee, and then keeping the third sport at $100. So it would mean a $100 increase for 2 and 3 sport athletes at the high school. I think if you look at that over a whole season and break it down by the week and the day, it's $100 affects a lot of families in different ways. Nobody wants to see fees go up, but I think that's what we're going to need to do for the recommendation.
We had figured out, if we did it $50 per sport, I don't know if Carl was in there, but you had the number of athletes for the second sport, and by raising it 100 for the first sport, we'd add about 26,000, for the second sport, we'd add about 26,500.
That sounds about right.
But for the third sport, if we did 50-50, we would significantly cut back on that amount because of the fewer participants in the third sport, correct?
2 or 3 sport athletes than anything.
Yeah, so I think we actually were maybe at 15 or 16,000 if we spread it 50-50, which means we'd have to find another 10,000 either somewhere else or to cut out of the budget. And I know I don't think we want to draw the balance in the revolving fund down to zero, correct, Carl?
Correct.
So I think even taking 15,000 from that revolving fund is getting it pretty close to.
I agree. Yeah.
So that's why the recommendation, I think, correct? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
obviously
think.
you were gonna raise more from doing the 100 on the second sport rather than doing the 50-50. So if
Right.
you're gonna split it up over the second, third sport, you probably have to do like 75 or something. So I think this is just simple math that gave us the 25 or 26,000 what we were looking for.
We also talked about adding some money to the family cap.
Right, 1,200.
That goes from 11 to 1,200?
Correct.
Correct.
And I think that was all factored into the 26,000.
Have we looked at any other places in the athletic budget that we can reduce cost?
Yes.
We're always trying to, I think in speaking with coaches, they're going through some of their budget requests, You talk about, you know, what do you want and what do you need to really, and there's a fine balance right now between the two. So we're trying to, you know, make it, these cuts where they don't affect the quality of, you know, the programs for the kids.
We did discuss that, but in the athletic subcommittee meeting, I think Dave has told all the coaches, see if you can come in with some savings someplace.
Because he's gotta cut 10,000, because a 5% cut out of about approximately 200,000 that we fund, he's gotta find about $10,000 in his
Nine,
budget.
There were three sources: an increase in fees, a hit on the revolving account, and a decrease of 5% in the
Right.
athletic budget.
Right.
So
And this
it-
maintains all the programs. The other thing that's not being said here too is that in addition to the parents having to pay the fees, we can't even put a finger on how much relief we get from some of the boosters organizations. So most of that money comes from the parents as well, if you come right down to it. So
Right.
the boosters contribute different things which we really don't keep track of, and that's also out of the parents' pockets.
And that's
in
going
addition
to be
the fees.
reduced anyway, so
Yeah,
we're not gonna get to the same level we
I
had
know,
in the past.
yeah, the boosters, I think, has been having more problems over the past year in terms of
Right.
draining their accounts
Yeah. Well,
because of the
that's the athletic
demands.
group, I'm
Yeah.
talking about all the booster
Oh, right,
organizations, so
yeah.
the support
Other
of
groups,
hockey
yeah.
Right.
and
Yeah, oh, yeah,
soccer
right.
and things like that. But you're right, the athletic boosters haven't had the money that they've had in the past either.
Right, they've had an increased reliance or request for assistance
Yeah.
from the athletic
To
boosters.
pay the user fee.
Yeah.
And they've had a decrease in donations as well.
Right.
So we're putting a lot of stress on the athletic account. This solution will certainly get us through the next year, but are we giving any thoughts to sustaining or increasing a program and how the user fee structure would look in the future? You know, we're getting awful close to just backing into numbers. You know, this hitting the second sport does that, it raises the money we need. And it just, it doesn't sit well with me because one of the expensive programs to run is football, and that's the first season sport.
Right.
So while that cost us the most, those students won't be picking up the fee. And hockey certainly is the other expensive sport, and that is in the second season. But at what point would we, as a district, look at charging based on the cost of the program? Maybe, you know, everybody pays a flat fee or an administration fee, and then beyond that, it's based on the cost of the program. I know it's a big inconvenience, and it means tracking those costs, constantly adjusted, but are we at that point?
I've never been a big fan of that, I can tell you. The problem I have is at what point do we say as a school committee how much we think the school department's responsible for paying for our athletic programs? I mean, you know, we've been running pretty close to 50% appropriation for the last number of years that I've been here, the 10 years I've been here. So that the budget pays for 10% and the revolving account or the user fees pays for the other, I'm sorry, 50% and the revolving account pays for the other 50%. And we've stayed pretty true to that. I think if you look now, we probably actually dropped down below 50%
We are
of
going,
the
with this,
appropriation.
with this change, we're
Yeah.
going below that.
And at what point do we say, okay, look, this is something that's necessary to the high school curriculum,
Yeah.
and everything's gotta be done in balance, and if we're already subsidizing 50% for parents or more than 50%, at what point do we say, look, we've gotta make a decision, you know, it's a 50-50 proposition? I don't know.
So you would see our efforts going in the opposite direction?
I
and
do.
We could recover some funds?
I
That's what I'd like to do.
And
We should be looking at having the athletic program sponsored by the system, not
I
by the
agree.
parents separately. And the problem we have is we don't have enough money to do that. And so we're using that as a revenue source.
That's right.
And that revenue source is continuing to increase, but what we really need to do is to make sure that we're being even-handed with the rest of the system. Because maybe what we should be doing is charging a little surcharge for kids who take science, for the science labs. And a little, no, I'm
being facetious.
truly, I'm not being serious with that. But that's the
Yes,
point.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
And-
science is important in high
Penally.
school sports, but I understand where you're coming from.
And maybe an extra charge for books, for English. But that kind of problem is across the board. What we're doing though, is that, and my point was in finding other places to economize in the program, is that everywhere else in the school system, we're economizing. We're cutting back on the paper we use, we're cutting back on toner cartridges, we're cutting back on heat, each one of these items, and we should be just as austere in the athletic program.
Right.
And I appreciate that, you know, there's a spirit thing associated with it, and I'm very much in favor of having an athletic program, but the thing that we have to do is to make sure that we are as skinny in your programs as we are in the rest of the school system.
I think, I've seen it firsthand. I think we're pretty skinny. I know when, a lot of times when the teams need uniforms, they're not getting any money from the athletic department. They're getting it from
Boosters
people who are
organizations.
boosters or private individuals who are donating. I mean, I think Dave is looking to cut more, but I think we're fairly austere, but I think that's a good, that's good advice, is that we have to look and be as skinny as we can. And I find it interesting, we're discussing this tonight, if you've been reading the Globe the past few days, talking about the Boston, the athletic situation in the Boston schools, and it's horrendous. You read that story. I think they spend less than 1% of the school budget on athletics. Now, we're spending about 2%, but the district isn't. The district is
No, we're
spending less than
we're
1%.
spending We're spending less than 1%.
Less than 1%
So
now.
it's a
Yeah.
good comparison. We spend less than 1% of our entire
Exactly.
appropriation on high school. on
And the
high school
state
level.
average is between 2% and 4%.
So, I mean, and at what point do we get, and we're approaching it now, where the cost of participation discourages participation?
I think we're there.
we're getting close to that.
I think we're there.
And when that starts to happen, then you're gonna lose the quality of the programs. You're gonna lose some programs, because people are gonna say, I'm not paying $400, $600, $900 for the kids to participate.
Right.
So,
I think, and we say this every year, let's revisit this next year with a hope of finding more money to cover athletics, but it gets more difficult every
Yeah.
year. But I think Maureen's idea of kind of coming back and taking a holistic look at it and saying, how are there different things, what are the different things we could do to somehow reduce fees, but make sure that we keep all the programs?
I mean, you've got a year on the subcommittee coming up.
Right.
Maybe you just, come back with a report before budget time.
yeah, I'm guessing, Dave, participation's gotta be running for at least one sport. About 65-70% of all the kids at the high school are playing at least one sport.
That might be a little high for one sport. I'd say it's probably.
No, but I'm saying at least one sport. In other words, 60 to 65
Oh, at
is-
least one
yeah,
sport, sure.
at least one
At
sport.
least one sport, you're right.
Playing 65%. So that's 65% of every child in town.
Mhm.
Because as they come up through the system, every
Mhm.
child that's in youth sports or in the elementary school,
Yeah.
65% of them are gonna play eventually at the high school level.
Well, look at some of the
So-
numbers coming up, and look at our 7th grade class this year, I think is well over 220 kids, 230 kids. You look at those numbers,
I mean, there was a picture in the paper this weekend of over 50 girls in the outdoor track team.
right,
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
good thing.
and we're getting
It
over
is a good
50
thing.
kids for each soccer team, and,
Yes.
I mean, you're just getting a lot of kids coming out to play.
Dave, I would like to know one thing, when we're going through making these changes and we implement them, I would like to know about participation for students that were juniors this year, for example, who are moving on to their senior year. What proportion are not picking up sports they played the previous year, and to try to think about how things have been affected.
Yeah, like a
That's good.
I mean,
dropout
I
rate.
would,
Right.
I would like to kind of see that. I mean, the only way you can do it is to compare the same individual across the years to really understand whether or not they dropped it. For this reason, we could also find out from parents. I mean, one easy way to do it is a survey of
Yeah.
parents, and so we understand this is a change we've made. How is this affecting you? And,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important we ask the question, because I think parents understand that we have to retrench where we are economically, but we also want to make sure that the burden is at least fairly distributed. And if the average cost per family of participating in athletics is gonna be somewhere between $100 and $200 on average, but for some families considerable,
Right.
I wanna know what that is.
A survey might be a
numbers
good
here
area.
by sport and by grade. I can forward those
Fantastic.
down.
Thank you.
Quick, Cal?
I want to touch on a couple things. To your point, Maureen, about making each cost self-supporting, Dave and I did work on that project during the
Right,
fall, and I think we
right.
did present to the school committee what the impact would be. So that information has been computed and is always available, should we ever want to revisit that. To your point about looking at